I was just gonna call it a night, but I think I'll make another half hour here and uh, of just reading this. I won't get into anything else. I'll just go ahead and finish reading what I'm reading. This is on page 41 of Ancient Mysteries in Modern Masonry. And this is on the Hindu mysteries. The mysteries of India were celebrated in temples carved out of solid rock, and in pyramids and dark pagodas. The Temple of Elephanta is perhaps the most ancient in the world. It is 135 feet square and 18 feet high, supported by 4 massive pillars, and its walls are covered with statues and carved emblematic decorations. The temples at Salseti exceed in magnitude those of Elephanta, though they are excavated in rock, their external form being pyramidal. The interior has many galleries and secret caverns, and in the inmost recesses of the structure, a cubical cista, a sepulchre, where the candidate was laid during his entranced state. An account of the initiation is given by Dr. Oliver in his History of Initiations, which we herewith condense as follows, quote, "The mysteries were divided into 4 degrees. The candidate might perform his first probation at the early age of 8 years. This consisted of an investiture of the zenar, or sacred cord of 3 threads corresponding to our cable toe. This investiture was attended with numerous ceremonies and ended with an extended lecture from the preceptor. After this, the candidate was clothed in a linen garment without seams, and a cord put over his right ear, and he was placed under the care of a Brahmin as a spiritual guide to be instructed in the necessary qualifications for the 2nd degree. He was subjected to many hardships and rigid penances, and was taught to preserve the purity of his body, to avoid external defilements, and to devote much time to study of the sacred books. At the age of 20, if he were found to have made suitable proficiency in the preceding degree, he was admitted on probation of the 2nd. Here his austerities were doubled. At the conclusion of this probation, he was initiated into the privileges of the mysteries. Sanctified by the sign of the cross, which was marked in every part of the body, he was subjected to the probation of Pastos, which was denominated the door of Patala or hell, the Tartarus of the Grecian mysteries. This was the mystical death. His perfection of the probationary period being attained, he was led at the dead of night to the cave which had been newly prepared for his reception. The interior of his cavern blazed with a light equal to the meridian sun. There sat in rich and costly robes the 3 chief hierophants, stationed in the east, west, and south, to represent the sacred triad, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, with the attendant mystagogues, clad in holy vestments, seated around. The well-known signal from the sacred bell summoned the aspirant into the center of the august assembly. When the ceremony commenced with an anthem and solemn invocation, the oath was then administered, after which the candidate was sprinkled with water and a mantra pronounced. He was then divested of his shoes, that the consecrated ground on which he stood might not be polluted, and was then made to circumambulate the temple 3 times, exclaiming each time on his arrival in the south, quote, "I copy the example of the sun," that's S-U-N, "and follow his benevolent course," unquote. Here we have the origin of the preparation of the candidates of the circuits, etc., of modern masonry. At the conclusion of the circuits, the candidate was placed in the care of a spiritual guide and directed to observe proper silence during the succeeding ceremonies. He was then passed through 7 ranges of dark and gloomy caverns. Amid the din of howls, shrieks, and dismal lamentations, a sudden explosion was heard which seemed to rend the mountains. Flashes of light streamed before his eyes, and then all was darkness and silence. Gradually he beheld shadows and phantoms of various shapes, some with many hands, arms, and legs, while others had none. The most terrible and frightful figures appeared, all typifying the generation of the gods and other sacred mysteries. The candidate then personified Vishnu, and was made to perform his numerous avatars. In the fifth manifestation, he took 3 steps at right angles, from which we get the 3 steps, as in the master's degree, ending at right angles. All these experiences were designed to teach certain lessons and illustrate important truths, as the 7 caverns, for instance, bore an allusion to the 7-fold division of the invisible world, the 7 places of reward and punishment. After all these trials, the pealing conch was sounded, the folding doors were thrown open, and the candidate was conducted into paradise, which was a spacious apartment blazing with 1,000 brilliant lights, ornamented with statues and emblematical figures, decorated profusely with gems and jewels. With eyes riveted on the altar, he was taught to expect the descent of the deity in the bright pyramidal fire that blazed upon it. This gorgeous display filled the mind of the aspirant with admiration and lighted up the holy fervor of devotion in his heart. And now, being fully regenerated, a new name was given him, expressive of his recently attained purity, and he was introduced to the chief Brahmin in the midst of the august assembly, who received him as a brother and associate and invested him with a white robe and tiara, seated him in an elevated place, and solemnly delivered the signs, tokens, and lectures of the order. His forehead was marked with a cross. Interesting, huh? Sounds a little familiar. An inverted level or tau cross was inscribed on his breast. This was a badge of innocence and a symbol of eternal life. He was invested with the sacred sash or belt, and finally he was entrusted with the sublime name, which was known only to the initiated. The arch-Brahmin then entered on an explanation of the various emblems which were arranged around him, with the arcana of the hidden science enfolded under the holy gloom of the mysterious veil. An extensive system of symbolical instruction was also used in the Hindu mysteries, and their philosophy was veiled under the impervious shade of hieroglyphical symbols, unintelligible to the profane, that's us, and intended to lead them into a maze of error. And that's very similar to what Albert Pike said in his Morals and Dogma, that the uninitiated, or the lower level initiates, were intentionally misled into this symbology of what their Freemasonic order is all about, and the masses too, from which it was difficult to extract a single idea which bore any semblance to the original truth. These symbols were publicly displayed in their temples, bearing streams of light to the initiated, while to the profane they were but an obscure mass of unintelligible darkness. No. The Persian Mysteries is next. Take a drink of water. The Persian Mysteries, or the Mysteries of Mithras, are among the most important of antiquity. Even Pythagoras is said to have traveled from Greece to receive initiation at the hands of those Persian hierophants. The candidates were prepared for initiation by various illustrations and 40-degree days of probation, which ended by a 50-day fast. These trials were undergone in a subterranean cavern, where the candidate was bound to perpetual silence. At the conclusion of his probation, he was guided into the hall of initiation and received on the point of a sword presented to his naked left breast, much like Freemasonry. I added that in. He was conducted into the inner chamber, where he was purified by fire and water, and then conducted through the 7 stages of initiation. Dr. Oliver describes these stages as follows, quote, "From the precipice where he stood, he beheld a deep and dangerous vault, into which a single false step might precipitate him down to the throne of dreadful necessity, which was an emblem of those infernal regions through which he was about to pass." Threading The circuitous mazes of the gloomy cavern, he was soon awakened from his trance of thought by seeing the sacred fire, at intervals, flash through its recesses to illuminate his path, sometimes bursting from beneath his feet, sometimes descending on his head in a broad sheet of white and shadowy flame. Amidst the admiration thus inspired, his terror was excited by the distant yelling of ravenous beasts, the roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, the fierce and threatening bark of dogs. Enveloped in blackest darkness, he was at a loss where to turn for safety, but was impelled rapidly forward by his attendant, who maintained an unbroken silence towards the quarter from whence the appalling sounds proceeded. And at the sudden opening of a door, he found himself in a den of wild beasts, dimly enlightened by the single lamp. His conductor exhorted him to courage, and he was immediately attacked, amidst the most tremendous uproar, by the initiated in the forms of lions, tigers, wolves, griffins, and other monstrous beasts. Fierce dogs appeared to rise from the earth, and with dreadful hollowings endeavored to overwhelm the aspirant with alarm, and how bravely soever his courage might sustain him in his unequal conflict, he seldom escaped unhurt. Being hurried through this cavern into another, he was once more shrouded in darkness. And this is interesting. How influenced some of our... It makes me kind of think of like a horror movie. Right? Because that's what they're going through, a pretty scary thing. And like a haunted house. You know, that's good to ancient times, right? That'd be really a haunted house, you know, for real. But this terror was all a part of the initiation. That's interesting how, you know, our Hollywood and the movie industry kind of have that in different genres. You know, they have the horror movies, and well, we know all these movies are, most of them, many of them are, you know, just made by members of these various mystery religions. So, and they consider the propaganda they put out as a form of initiation ritual for the profane or the masses. So, you know, that kind of makes me feel like, yeah, that's served the purpose of all the horror movies and stuff. It kind of acts as sort of a part of the initiation of the masses. Anyways. Being hurried through this cavern into another, he was once more shrouded in darkness. A dead silence succeeded, and he was obliged to proceed with deliberate step, meditating on the danger he had just escaped, and smarting under the wounds he had received. His attention, however, was soon roused from these reflections and directed to other dangers which appeared to threaten. An undefined rumbling noise was heard in a distant range of caverns, which became louder and louder as he advanced until the pealing thunder seemed to rend the solid rocks and burst the caverns around him. And the vivid and continued flashes of lightning and streaming sheets of fire rendered visible the flitting shades of avenging genii, who, frowning displeasure, appeared to threaten with summary destruction these daring intruders into the privacy of their hallowed abodes. Scenes like these were multiplied with increasing horror until nature could no longer endure the trial, and when the aspirant was ready to sink under the effects of exhaustion and mental agony, he was conveyed into another apartment to recruit his strength. Here a vivid illumination was suddenly introduced, and his outraged feelings were soothed by the sound of melodious music and the flavor of grateful perfumes. Seated at rest in his apartment, his guide explained the elements of those invaluable secrets which were more fully developed when his initiation was complete. Having pronounced himself disposed to proceed through the remaining ceremonies, a signal was given by his conductor, and 3 priests immediately made their appearance, one of whom, after a long and solemn pause, cast a living serpent into his bosom as a token of regeneration. And a private door being opened, there issued forth such howlings and cries of lamentation and despair as struck him with new and indescribable emotions of terror. He turned his eyes with an involuntary motion to the place from whence these bewellings appeared to proceed, and beheld in every appalling form the torments of the wicked in Hades. Turning from this scene of woe, he was passed through some other dark caverns and passages, until, having successfully threaded the labyrinth, consisting of 6 spacious vaults, connected by winding galleries, each opening of with a narrow stone portal, the scene of some perilous adventure, and having, by the exercise of fortitude and perseverance, been triumphantly borne through this accumulated mass of difficulty and danger, the doors of the 7th vault, or saculum, were thrown open, and his darkness was changed into light. He was admitted into the spacious and lofty cavern already described, which was denominated the sacred grotto of Elysium. Yeah. This consecrated place was brilliantly illuminated and sparkled with gold and precious stones. A splendid sun and starry system emitted their dazzling radiance and moved in order to the symphonies of heavenly music. Here sat the Archimagus in the east, elevated on a throne of burnished gold, crowned with a rich diadem decorated with myrtle bows, and habited in a flowing tunic of a bright cerulean tincture. Round him were arranged in solemn order the presouls and dispensers of the mysteries, forming altogether a reverend assembly, which covered the awestruck aspirant with a profound feeling of veneration, and by an involuntary impulse frequently produced an act of worship. Here he was received with congratulations after having entered into the usual engagements for keeping secret the sacred rites of Mithras. The sacred words were entrusted to him, of which the ineffable Tetractys, or name of God, was the chief. The candidate was then instructed in the secret science. The meaning of the emblems was explained, the incidents experienced, converted to a moral purpose, and their significance made clear. Nothing was done without a purpose, and every experience illustrated some truth and fact in nature. What they were designed to set forth we shall see in subsequent lectures. Suffice it here to say that the Mithra mystery was identical with the Christ mystery, the mystery of man's perfection and final apotheosis. There you go again. All these initiation, mystery school, dramas, and all these various fraternal orders and secret societies is all about man becoming God. The deification of the human race. Very close to attempting to accomplish anyways. With the transhumanists and the men behind this new world order. And this is the religion that pretty much, that is basically what drives them. Right? The secret of regeneration, of being born anew or spiritually or from above, in brief, the divinizing of man. Again, that's another term referring to making man God, divinizing. Was the last word of the Mithra rites, all else is introductory or ancillary. This secret was the one secret of all the great mystery rites and mystery arts. Mysteries of Mithra, Mead. And I have to interject, you see, just because I'm reading from this text, and you got another Mason here who's linking Christianity with the ancient mystery schools, that does not in any way mean that I agree with that or I believe in that. Yeah, I've done videos previously on my channel where I show, at least from what I find in the Bible, anyways, my opinion, that what they state as, what the mystery school initiates will say is evidence that Christ and Paul and them were initiates of some mystery school. I point out the real context of those passages they use and point out that they're mistaken or wrong. And honestly, he says that Mithra mysteries are identical with the Christ mysteries. Well, if the Mithra rites were all about the divinizing of man, I mean, Jesus, according to his own words, believed in Yahweh, Torah, and Yahweh and Torah does not teach that man is God. It does not teach any of that. There's plenty of verses, too many of them, to say that, well, that's just one or two verses. No, there's a lot of them that actually say that how that's a great sin. To think that you can be equal with God or that you can be a God at all. So, for them to say that the Mithraelites are, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, there might be some truth to that, but overall, I think which is why the religion that they want to bring about in the New World Order is the mystery religions. It's not anything Abrahamic. It's before then, before the Abrahamic religions. It's because the Abrahamic religions do not teach that any deification of man whatsoever. It teaches subservience to a one God. Or, the Trinity of Christians or whatever. But you get the point. Finish this up. A ritual dealing with the mystery of apotheosis and used by the most advanced in the Mithraic esoteric circles has recently been discovered. It is a yoga rite, one far in advance of the lower grades of initiation. Initiation does not mean consummation, it is merely starting things going. The candidate to make the initiation valid must seal up the links, so to speak, and this Mithraic ritual has to do with the final stages of spiritual evolution. For a complete exposition of this ritual, see A Mithraic Ritual by G.R.S. Mead. Besides the various rites of initiation already described, we find the same sacraments and the mysteries that in later years were administered in the Christian Church. Justin Martyr, 150 AD, says that the evil demons and the mysteries of Mithras aped the Christian Eucharist, for there was an offering of bread and of a cup of water with certain explanatory sacred formulae. Now it's from Justin Martyr, First Apology, Volume 2, Section 4, and 7 and 9. Second Apology, Section 8. Oh, no, wait, sorry, 13. Tertullian, from 210 AD, in speaking of the Mithraic mysteries, says, quote, "He too baptizes some, that is, his own believers and faithful followers. He promises the putting away of sins by a labor of his own, and if my memory still serves me, Mithra there in the kingdom of Satan sets his mark on the foreheads of his soldiers, celebrates also the oblation of bread, and introduces an image of a resurrection, and before his sword reads a crown," unquote. Where that's taken from Prescription Against Heretics, chapter XL. Tertullian also explains the identities by resorting to the convenient theology of the devil aping the Christian forms. But this curious explanation will hardly find adherents today. It is difficult to accept the earlier as copies and the more recent as originals. We shall see later the origin and meaning of these similarities. Thus we find in the ancient Egyptian, Hindu, and Persian mysteries a system of religious culture and training that originated thousands of years ago, in which through many centuries preserved and handed down the Master's word to those who had made sufficient progress and were thereby duly and truly prepared to receive it. These great institutions were the wonder of the world, hence it is not strange that they received the highest praise from all the great men of antiquity. And that's it with that section. I'll be right back here. I'm going to see what the next one is. Next lecture is the Druidical, Gothic, Grecian, and Jewish mysteries. Okay, so yep, that'd be another one to get into. Topic that'd be interesting. Yeah, most of those verses that they usually try to apply from the New Testament, anyways, when they quote Jesus, I usually find that contextually they're involving like something. It's just they're taking it out of context. Like for instance, there's that passage that the Illuminati like to use a lot to claim Jesus as their own, or to claim Jesus taught esoteric mysteries, where he tells his disciples when he's speaking those parables to the multitude, tells his disciples, and his disciples are, why do you speak to them in parables? Jesus tells them, for it is to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. They'll claim that passage, and at first glance, yeah, when you're just looking at the passage, you're not going beyond that. However, if you read further down in the text, Jesus begins quoting, speaking of the multitude. For seeing they may understand, and hearing they may hear, for in them Isaiah the prophet is fulfilled. And he quotes Isaiah chapter 6, and I went back to Isaiah chapter 6 to find the actual context behind what he was saying there. And those multitudes he was talking about mainly were talking about those people that were going to incur God's wrath during the time Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman army. So in that Isaiah passage, it said that they were going to be blinded unless they open their eyes and open their ears, whatever. Isaiah asked God, for how long? For how long would this blindness on Israel, be, or whatever, until their land is desolate and destroyed. So you had your clue there that that's what Jesus was alluding to. He was talking about, it was a context for that time and that people, Israel, for them mainly. Not, post-church age where just anyone outside the church doesn't understand the mysteries. I mean, those mysteries he was talking about to his disciples, from my opinion and in my findings, is basically what we now know today as, the spiritual kingdom of heaven. Back then, when Jesus first stepped in the scene, those guys that were learned in Torah, they didn't fully understand the spiritual fulfillment of their messianic prophecies and promises given by God through the Old Testament prophets. So they were, in that respect, they were blinded. They had no idea that they thought their kingdom was going to be an earthly one and wind up being spiritual and all that other stuff. So a lot of those were really those mysteries Christ was speaking about. Not everything, but a good chunk of it. And Gentiles becoming fellow heirs with the chosen Jews of the Christian, the first Christian church. So yeah, so I'm getting tired here, I guess. It's been a long day, so I'll call this a night. Thank you for listening, and I know I have so little views these days. I appreciate those who are watching and those who are thumbing up my vids. And appreciate Tony Art Blue, Tony is your real name. I appreciate you watching me all this time. And yeah, I mean, it's just hard to get the message out these days and get a whole bunch of people to listen to you, so it's really hard to continue on with the channel, but in a sense I enjoy it. So have a good night, everybody.